Maya's fingertips traced the edge of the ancient stone wall as she walked through the forgotten library. The books were old, so old that their pages crumbled when touched by anything but the gentlest hand. She had spent most of her life in this place, learning the history of her people before everything changed. The Great War had ended 1,000 years ago, and the dragons had chosen to sleep, leaving her kind to rule the forest lands alone. But now everything felt different. The sky itself seemed wrong somehow. For 3 weeks, strange lights had appeared above the atmosphere, machines that hummed with an otherworldly sound. Maya knew something terrible was coming, but she had no way to prepare. Her people numbered only 500 now, scattered across the vast forests in small villages. They had no weapons, no armies, no experience with war. They had chosen peace 1,000 years ago and never looked back. As the sun set on that particular evening, Maya heard the first scream. It came from the village to the north, a sound of terror that cut through the quiet forest like a blade. She grabbed her bow and ran, her long legs carrying her faster than any human could move. What she found broke her heart. The mining machines had arrived during the day, moving through the forest with no regard for the ancient trees or the sacred groves. They had begun extracting minerals from the earth, ripping open the ground with mechanical arms that looked like the limbs of demons. The villagers had tried to stop them peacefully, but the machines did not respond to words or pleas. They simply continued their work, leaving destruction in their wake. Maya tried to speak with the human operators, but they could not understand her language, and she could barely comprehend their harsh, guttural tongue. A man in a suit made of metal told her in broken words that the land now belonged to the corporation. Her people had no rights here. They would be relocated or removed. Those were the only options. That night, Maya gathered the elders and told them what she had learned. They argued for hours about what should be done. Some wanted to hide deeper in the forest where humans could not follow. Others wanted to negotiate to find some way to coexist with these strange newcomers. An old elf named Thorn suggested something radical. He spoke of the Dragon Sanctuary, a place forbidden since the ancient times. The dragons had been sleeping for so long that everyone assumed they were dead, just statues of stone and magic left over from a war that nobody alive could remember. But Thorn believed that if the dragons still lived, they might be willing to help their old allies. The council rejected the idea immediately. Waking the dragons was too dangerous, too unpredictable. But Maya could not accept defeat so easily. That night she made a choice that would change everything. She packed her supplies in silence and headed toward the mountains where the dragon sanctuary lay hidden. The path was treacherous and overgrown with vines and strange plants that had grown unchecked for centuries. It took her 3 days to reach the entrance, a massive cavern carved into the mountainside. Inside, the air felt thick with ancient magic. The walls glowed with a faint blue light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Maya descended deeper, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard stories about the dragons her entire life, but seeing them was something else entirely. The first chamber was enormous, its ceiling stretching so high that her eyes could not find where the stone ended and the sky began. And there, resting on a bed of crystal and gold, lay Soren. The dragon was even more magnificent than the stories had suggested. His scales shimmered like liquid sapphire, reflecting light in ways that seemed impossible. His wings were folded against his body, and his massive head rested on one of his enormous claws. He was sleeping, but his eyes flickered beneath closed lids as if he dreamed of ancient battles and forgotten victories. Maya approached slowly, respectfully. She had been taught since childhood how to address a dragon, the proper words of greeting that had been passed down through generations. She spoke them now, her voice small in the vast chamber. At first nothing happened. Then Soren's eyes opened, glowing like molten gold in the darkness. He lifted his head, and his gaze fell upon the small elf before him. For a long moment neither of them moved. Then a rumbling sound filled the chamber, a sound so deep that Maya felt it in her bones. The dragon was laughing. He rose to his full height, and Maya realized how truly enormous he was. He could crush her with a single claw, could burn her to ash with a breath, but instead, he spoke to her in her own language, words that seemed to come from the earth itself. He told her that he had been waiting for this day, that he had sensed her coming even in his long sleep. He told her that the world above had changed, and that new dangers had emerged. He asked her why she had disturbed his slumber. Maya explained everything, She told him about the humans and their machines, about the destruction of the forests, about her people's suffering. Soren listened without interruption, his golden eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he called out into the darkness of the cavern, a sound that echoed and amplified until it seemed to shake the mountains themselves. From deeper within the sanctuary, another dragon emerged. This one was smaller than Soren, but no less impressive. Her scales were golden, shimmering like the sun itself, and her eyes held an intelligence and wisdom that seemed almost ancient beyond measure. This was Lyra, Soren's mate and companion through countless ages. She approached Maya with curiosity, lowering her massive head to inspect the tiny elf more closely. Maya stood her ground, refusing to show fear. Lyra let out a low rumble that Maya understood as approval. The dragon had respected her courage. Soren spoke again, his voice carrying weight and power. He told Maya that they had made a pact long ago with her people, a promise to stand with them in times of great need. That time had come. The dragons would help defend the forest lands, but there was a condition. Maya would have to serve as a bridge between the dragons and her people, a representative who could speak for both sides and ensure that peace would be the ultimate goal, not simply victory. Maya agreed without hesitation. She had come to wake the dragons, but she had not expected to become their chosen ambassador. Yet the responsibility felt right somehow, as if this was what she had been meant to do all along. As the sun rose the next morning, Maya stood at the entrance to the sanctuary with Soren and Lyra beside her. The dragons stretched their wings, preparing to take flight for the first time in centuries. The world above had no idea what was coming. Change was in the air, and it would sweep through the land like a storm, changing everything forever. The mining colony did not expect what happened next. Commander Weber had been running successful operations across 12 different worlds, and this planet had seemed like the easiest assignment of his career. The local population was small and peaceful, with no organized military or advanced technology. His team had estimated they could extract minerals for another 5 years without any serious resistance. Then the dragons appeared. It started as reports from the mining sites. Workers claimed they had seen massive shadows flying overhead, but nobody took it seriously. People saw things in remote mining operations all the time, imagined threats that did not exist. But then one of the drilling rigs stopped responding. When a rescue team was sent to investigate, they found it had been destroyed. The damage was consistent with weapon fire, but nobody was attacking them. There were no marks from conventional explosives, no signs of organized military force. The structure had simply been torn apart by something massive and powerful. Weber called an emergency meeting with his security team. He was not a man who frightened easily. He had fought in wars on 3 different planets and had always come out on top. But something about this situation felt wrong. As they discussed the possibilities, an alarm rang through the command center. Sensors had detected movement in the atmosphere above them. 2 massive objects were descending through the clouds, objects that were far too large to be anything natural. Maya sat atop Soren's back as they flew toward the mining colony, feeling the wind rushing past her face. Behind them, Lyra flew in perfect formation, her golden scales catching the afternoon light. From the ground, Maya imagined they must look like demons from an ancient nightmare, creatures of pure destruction. But that was not their purpose. Maya had told Soren and Lyra repeatedly that their goal was to protect, not to destroy. They would demonstrate their power, show the humans that this world belonged to the elves and the dragons, but they would not kill unless absolutely necessary. As they approached the colony, Maya could see the humans scrambling below, pointing upward and running in all directions. Some were attempting to arm weapons, but those weapons were designed for ground combat, not for aerial targets. The dragons descended slowly, deliberately, making themselves visible in the full light of day. Soren let out a roar that shook the very ground, a sound that contained centuries of power and authority. The noise was so loud that several humans collapsed from the sheer force of it. Lyra landed gracefully in the center of the compound, her massive body destroying buildings simply by her weight. She did not attack anyone directly. She simply stood there, a living embodiment of the power that Maya's people possessed. Maya dismounted from Soren's back and walked forward, her bow held peacefully across her body. She wanted to speak with Weber, to make their position clear, but when the commander appeared, surrounded by armed guards, everything happened very quickly. A nervous soldier, terrified beyond reason, fired a weapon at Maya. The energy bolt came fast, but it did not reach her. Lyra moved with incredible speed despite her massive size, interposing herself between Maya and the attack. The bolt struck the dragon's scales and dissipated harmlessly. Lyra did not retaliate. She simply turned and looked at the soldier with an expression that conveyed disappointment and sadness. Maya stepped forward again, her hand raised in a gesture of peace. She spoke in the human language, carefully using the few words she had learned from the human operators during their brief conversations. She told Weber that his machines must leave, that the forest must be protected. She told him that the dragons would not harm his people if they left peacefully. Weber was a military man, trained to understand power and respect strength. What he saw before him was more powerful than anything his colony could muster. He made a decision in that moment that would define the rest of his career. He ordered his troops to stand down. He told them to cease all mining operations immediately. He arranged for his people to begin preparations for evacuation. Some of his officers protested, but Weber was firm. He had seen enough wars to know when he was facing an unwinnable situation. As the humans began loading their equipment and preparing their ships for departure, Maya felt something she had not experienced in weeks: hope. But her victory celebration was cut short when a new signal came through the communication systems. A fleet was approaching, much larger than Weber's colony. The corporation had decided to send reinforcements, thousands of soldiers and powerful weapon systems. They had received Weber's message but had dismissed it as impossible. No dragons existed. There had to be a rational explanation. They were sending an invasion force to take control of the situation and crush whatever resistance the local population had organized. Maya looked at Soren and Lyra, and she could see the question in their ancient eyes. They were asking if she wanted them to fight, if she wanted them to use their power to destroy this new threat. For a moment, Maya was tempted. She could end this right now, could prevent all the bloodshed and suffering that might come, but she held firm to her principles. War would not solve this problem. Violence would only create more violence. There had to be another way. She climbed back onto Soren's back and asked the dragon to take her to the human settlement. She needed to find someone who could help her, someone among the humans who could communicate with those in power and make them understand that peace was possible. Soren flew her to the colony, landing carefully to avoid crushing any structures. Maya walked through the human settlement, searching for someone who might listen, someone who had the courage to stand against the corporation and speak the truth. That was when she saw Grace working alone in one of the equipment bays, deliberately sabotaging the mining machinery. Here was a human who understood what was happening, who had already made the choice to stand against her own people for what was right. Maya approached her slowly, and Grace looked up, startled to see an elf standing in front of her. For a long moment, the two women simply looked at each other. Then Grace smiled, and Maya knew she had found the ally she needed. Grace had always known that she was different from the others working at the mining colony. While most of her colleagues saw this world as nothing more than a source of profit, she had spent her first months here learning about the native ecosystem. She had studied the forests, the wildlife, and the ancient structures scattered throughout the land. She had even learned a few words in the elf language, fascinated by a civilization that had developed without the need for constant warfare and exploitation. When the corporation decided to begin mining operations in the sacred groves, Grace had tried to speak up. She had presented research showing that the mineral extraction would destroy an irreplaceable ecosystem and displace an entire civilization. Her reports had been ignored. The corporation cared nothing for the lives of a few thousand elves or the ecological consequences of their actions. They cared only for profits and expansion, so Grace had made a choice. She began sabotaging equipment, small things that would not be immediately noticed. A faulty wire here, a miscalibrated sensor there. Her actions had slowed the mining operations significantly, but it was not enough. The corporation simply sent more workers and more machines. Grace knew she was going to be caught eventually, that her sabotage would be discovered and she would face severe punishment. Perhaps that was why she did not run when she saw the elf woman standing in the equipment bay. Instead, she smiled. Maya did not understand the smile at first. She had expected fear or anger or violence, but Grace's expression contained none of those things. Instead, there was recognition, as if Grace understood exactly why Maya was there. Grace pointed to a communicator on the wall and then to herself, making a gesture that suggested she wanted to speak with the dragon outside. Maya nodded and led her out to where Soren waited. Grace approached the dragon without hesitation, something that impressed Maya greatly. Most humans would have been paralyzed by fear in the presence of such a magnificent creature, but Grace walked up to Soren and placed her hand on his scaled chest, and the dragon lowered his head to look at her. They seemed to communicate without words, as if Grace could somehow understand what Soren was feeling. When Soren raised his head again, Grace turned to Maya and began to speak. She explained her situation quickly and efficiently, telling Maya about the sabotage and the fact that the corporation would soon discover her involvement. She told Maya about the incoming fleet and the weapons they carried. She told her that those weapons had the potential to cause serious harm to the dragons if they were deployed correctly. But she also told Maya something important. She said that not all humans were loyal to the corporation. Many of them, especially the younger ones, had joined for jobs and money, not out of any real belief in what they were doing. If someone could reach them, could show them the truth about what was happening on this world, they might be willing to refuse to fight. Together, Maya and Grace made a plan. They would use the colony's communication systems to broadcast a message to the incoming fleet. Grace would compose the message herself, using footage and data that she had collected over months of working here. She would show the dragons as intelligent beings, not as threats. She would show the beauty of the forests and the peaceful nature of the elf civilization. She would make an emotional appeal to the soldiers and crew members of the incoming fleet, asking them to question whether they really wanted to participate in the destruction of an innocent world. It was a desperate strategy, but it was the best they had. They would implement it the moment the fleet came close enough for transmission. In the meantime, Grace agreed to stay with Maya and help her understand the human perspective. She moved to the elf settlement hidden deep in the forest, where she lived with Maya and began to learn the ways of the ancient people. Soren and Lyra seemed fascinated by Grace. They would often visit her at night, sitting with her as she taught them about human history and technology. In return, the dragons shared stories of their ancient wars and the civilizations they had known. Grace learned that dragons were not mindless beasts at all. They possessed intelligence that rivaled or exceeded human intelligence. They understood politics, strategy, and the complexities of maintaining peace across different species. They had chosen to sleep for 1,000 years specifically because they had grown tired of war and conflict. They had hoped that in their absence, younger species would find a way to live peacefully with each other. The irony was not lost on any of them. Now they were being called upon to defend their ancient allies, to prove that their 1,000 years of sleep had not diminished their power or their commitment to their promises. The Elf Council was cautious about trusting Grace at first. Some of the older elves feared that she was a spy, sent to gather intelligence about them. But as days passed and Grace proved her sincerity, they began to accept her. She helped them understand what the corporation wanted, what resources they valued, and how to predict their tactics. She became invaluable to the defense of the elf lands. When the fleet first appeared on the sensors, everyone was ready. Grace had prepared her message carefully, creating a video presentation that showed the beauty of the world and the innocence of its people. She had included footage of Soren and Lyra that she had filmed in secret, showing them interacting peacefully with the elves, playing with young dragon hatchlings, and flying through the forests like creatures from a dream. She had even included her own personal testimony, explaining why she had chosen to rebel against her own people and join with the elves. Maya stood beside Grace as they prepared to send the transmission. The human woman's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the communication controls. Grace looked at Maya and asked if she believed this would work. Maya placed her hand on Grace's shoulder and told her that sometimes faith was all anyone had. Sometimes the only weapon more powerful than violence was the truth. Grace nodded and activated the transmission. The message went out across every channel that the corporation fleet was using, reaching thousands of soldiers and crew members simultaneously. On ships throughout the fleet, people stopped what they were doing and watched. They saw the dragons dancing through the skies. They saw the ancient forests and the peaceful villages of the elves. They heard Grace's voice explaining why this world was worth protecting and why they should choose not to fight. As the transmission ended, Maya and Grace held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Behind them, Soren and Lyra watched the skies, ready to respond to whatever threat came their way. The fate of their world hung in the balance. The fleet commander's name was Colonel Norton, and she had spent 30 years serving the corporation without question. She had risen through the ranks by being ruthless, efficient, and completely dedicated to the mission of expanding corporate interests across the galaxy. She had ordered the destruction of settlements before. She had authorized the use of weapons on civilian populations. She had done whatever was necessary to achieve her objectives. But something about the transmission that came through her communication system made her pause. Norton was not a woman given to doubt or philosophical questioning. Yet as she watched the video of the dragons flying through the sky, as she heard Grace's voice explaining why the corporation was wrong, something shifted in her perspective. She found herself asking questions she had not considered in decades. She asked herself whether the corporation's missions were actually justified, whether she had been using her power for good or for evil. Around the fleet, other officers and soldiers were having similar thoughts. A soldier named Mitchell was watching the transmission from his quarters. He had joined the military because he needed work, because his family needed money, not because he had any real hatred for aliens or any belief in corporate expansion. Seeing the dragons and hearing Grace's message made him realize that he was about to participate in something terrible. He found himself thinking about whether he could really fire weapons at creatures like that, at a civilization that had done nothing wrong. A pilot named Harrison was in the flight bay when the transmission played on every screen. He watched the footage of the dragons dancing through the sky with a sense of wonder and awe. He had spent his entire career fighting for abstract principles. But here was something real, something beautiful that could be destroyed forever if he participated in the invasion. He made a decision in that moment. He would not fight. No matter what orders he received, he would refuse to be part of this attack. In the command center, Colonel Norton called her senior officers together. She told them that she was recommending a cessation of operations and a withdrawal from the planet. Her officers protested immediately. They reminded her that the corporation had invested billions in this operation, that shareholders expected a return on their investment, that orders from corporate headquarters were absolute. Norton listened to their arguments and then told them something that surprised everyone in the room. She said that she had spent 30 years following orders without question, and she had come to realize that some orders were wrong. She said that she could not, in good conscience, order an attack on this world. She said that she was filing an official report with the corporate board, recommending that the mining operations be abandoned and the planet be protected. She said that if anyone wanted to disagree with that recommendation, they could file their own report, but she would not authorize the invasion. A tense silence fell over the command center. Then one of the other officers, a man named Torres, stepped forward. He said that he agreed with Norton. He said that he had joined the military to protect people and resources, not to destroy innocent civilizations. He said that he was willing to support Norton's decision. Other officers followed suit, one after another. Within an hour, Colonel Norton had the support of enough senior staff that going forward with the invasion would be politically impossible within the military chain of command. She contacted the corporate board directly and informed them of her decision. The board was furious. They tried to override her, to remove her from command and replace her with someone more compliant. But Norton had anticipated this. She had recorded her entire conversation with Grace's transmission and her reasoning for her decision. She released this recording to media outlets throughout the corporation's territory. Suddenly, corporate executives were receiving calls from journalists asking why they wanted to invade a peaceful planet and destroy an innocent civilization. Questions began to be asked about the corporation's practices across all of its worlds. Shareholders started demanding explanations and accountability. The corporation realized that continuing with the invasion would create a public relations disaster that could threaten their entire enterprise. In the end, the corporate board made a pragmatic decision. They authorized a full withdrawal of all forces from the planet. Colonel Norton was officially censured and removed from active duty, but her life was not destroyed and she maintained her pension and benefits. More importantly, the invasion was canceled. As the fleet began its withdrawal, Maya and Grace stood together on a high cliff watching the ships move away from the planet. Soren and Lyra flew overhead in celebration, their roars of victory echoing across the valleys. It seemed like the battle had been won without a shot being fired, a triumph of diplomacy and truth over force and greed. But Maya knew that this victory was fragile. The corporation might try again in the future. Other corporations might come to this world with different intentions. The work of protecting this planet and its people would continue indefinitely. Still, for now there was peace. For now the forests would be safe. For now the elves and dragons could live their lives without fear of destruction. As the sun set on that day, Maya looked at Grace and thanked her for her courage and her willingness to stand against her own people. Grace took Maya's hand and said that she had made the choice to follow her conscience, and that choice had led her to find a place where she belonged. She had found purpose and meaning in protecting this world. She had found something more important than money or power or corporate advancement. She had found friendship and trust with a people who cared about the future of their world more than personal gain. That night, as Maya and Grace sat beneath the twin moons watching Soren and Lyra sleep on the crystal beds in the dragon sanctuary, they both felt that something profound had changed. The age of exploitation and destruction had ended for this world. A new age was beginning, an age where different species could work together toward a common goal of protection and preservation. 3 months had passed since the corporate fleet retreated from the planet. The landscape had begun to heal from the damage caused by the mining operations. The forests were slowly regrowing. The soil was being restored by ancient elf magic, and new life was beginning to flourish in places that had been scarred by human machinery. Maya walked through one of these recovering areas with Grace beside her, showing the human woman how the elves used their connection to nature to help plants grow and animals return to their habitats. Grace marveled at the process, fascinated by abilities that seemed to border on the magical but were actually based on deep knowledge of plant biology and ecological systems. The Elf Council had formally welcomed Grace as a permanent member of their community. She had been given a home in the elf settlement and had begun learning their language and customs. Maya was teaching her everything she could about elf culture, history, and the ancient ways of her people. In return, Grace was teaching the elves about human technology and science, creating a knowledge exchange that was enriching both civilizations. Soren and Lyra had become regular visitors to the settlement, no longer confined to the dragon sanctuary. The dragons seemed to enjoy the company of the elves and had developed a particular fondness for Grace, who spent hours talking with them and listening to their ancient stories. The dragons told her about the war that had caused them to sleep for 1,000 years, about the civilizations they had known, about the mistakes they had made, and the lessons they had learned. Through their tales, Grace was gaining an understanding of history and conflict that was deeper than anything she had learned in school. One evening, as Maya, Grace, and the dragon sat together watching the twin moons rise, Lyra asked Grace a question. The dragon asked the human woman if she missed her own people, if she regretted the choice to stay on this planet instead of returning with the corporation. Grace thought about this carefully before answering. She said that she had been searching for something her entire life without knowing what it was. She had thought that achievement and advancement in the corporate world would bring her fulfillment, but it never did. She said that standing with Maya and Soren and Lyra against the corporation had given her more meaning and purpose than anything she had experienced in her previous life. She said that she had found her home here, with these people and creatures in this civilization that valued wisdom and peace over profit and power. Soren rumbled with what sounded like approval. The great dragon told Grace that she had made a wise choice, that she was welcome to stay as long as she wished. More than that, he said, she was welcome to help shape the future of this world. Soren explained that he and Lyra had been discussing what should happen next. The elves and dragons needed to establish formal diplomatic relationships with human governments and organizations. They needed to ensure that no other corporations would attempt to exploit this planet in the future. They needed to create a model for how different species could coexist peacefully. They needed someone who could understand both the human perspective and the elf and dragon perspective. They needed Grace to serve as an ambassador to the wider human civilization. Grace was shocked by this proposal. She had never imagined herself in such a position. But Maya took her hand and told her that she was the perfect choice. Maya said that Grace had already proven her willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for what was right. She had proven her ability to communicate across species and cultural boundaries. She had proven her commitment to this world and its people. Grace would be an excellent ambassador. Over the following weeks, Grace began her new role as ambassador. She worked with the Elf Council and the Dragon leaders to develop proposals for how this world should be protected and governed in the future. She recorded testimonies and documented the history of what had happened, creating a permanent record that could be shared with other human governments and organizations. She prepared herself for eventual contact with the wider human civilization, knowing that she would be the primary representative of this world to that civilization. Meanwhile, Maya became the official leader of the elf people. The council formally granted her the title of queen, acknowledging her role in saving her civilization from destruction. Maya was nervous about the responsibility, but she was determined to honor the trust that her people had placed in her. She began implementing reforms and improvements to elf society, creating educational programs to teach the younger generation about the outside world, establishing relationships with dragon leaders, and working with Grace to plan for the future. The dragon sanctuary was transformed from a place of ancient sleep into a place of active community and learning. Young dragons that had been born while the ancient dragons slept began to emerge from their crystal chambers. The oldest of the elder dragons woke from their long sleep to find a world that had changed dramatically. They were initially resistant to the idea of peace and cooperation with elves and humans, but Soren and Lyra explained what had happened and convinced them that change was necessary. Slowly, the dragon community began to embrace the new vision of a world where all species lived together in harmony. 1 year after Grace had first arrived at the elf settlement, a festival was held to celebrate the anniversary of the peace. Representatives from 3 different human governments were invited to attend, along with delegates from other elf settlements on the planet. The festival lasted for 7 days and included music, food, and cultural exchanges between the different species. Humans, elves, and dragons mingled together freely, sharing stories and learning about each other's cultures. Children of all species played together in the forests. For the first time, there was a genuine possibility that peace between different civilizations could be more than just a temporary truce. It could be the beginning of something much larger and more significant. As the festival ended and the human delegates prepared to return to their home worlds, they carried with them a message from Maya, Soren, and Grace. The message was simple but powerful. It said that intelligence and compassion were more valuable than greed and power. It said that different species could work together to create something better than any of them could create alone. It said that this world, and the peace that had been established here, was a model for how other worlds could function. More than that, it was a promise for the future. As Maya stood at the edge of the great cliff where her journey had begun, watching the sun set over the healing forests, Grace stood beside her. The 2 women had become more than allies. They had become sisters bound together by shared purpose and mutual respect. Behind them, Soren and Lyra watched the sky, ready to protect their world and its people. In the distance, other dragons could be seen flying through the air, their scales catching the last light of the setting sun. The age of exploitation had ended. The age of peace had begun, and it had all started with one elf woman's decision to trust in the power of dragons and believe in the possibility of peace with her enemies. That belief had changed everything.